And what stuck with me is if you are forced to think that something is possible or that like it can be achieved or somebody's just challenging you to achieve more, like we need those moments of encouragement to know that things are possible or the idea that something can be achieved all of a sudden makes you feel like, all right, well now the onus is on me. If it's not being achieved, I can no longer blame the circumstances around me. Like, I have to take accountability. And so
this is Innovation Currency. My name is Leigh-Ann Buchanan, and I am your host. What I want this podcast to help people see about themselves is that innovation is for everyone, and everyone is an innovator. I developed a simple test, a quiz, if you will, to help anyone discover their hidden innovation traits from across 4 specific domains: disruptor, connector, distributor, and influencer. If you haven't already taken the quiz, please stop, take a pause, and go by visiting my website, www.leighanbuchanan.com/innovator quiz.
My name is Chad Bernstein. I'm a father and a very lucky husband and a musician and a social entrepreneur and leader of a wonderful nonprofit organization that I founded called Guitars Over Guns.
Awesome. Marte?
I'm Marte Siebenhar, and I am a creative and a strategist.
I love it. I love it. So what we're going to talk about here today, which is conversations that we've all had just hanging out in passing, which is about innovation. And what I wanted to start off by asking both of you, how do you define the term innovator? I'll start with you, Marte, and then we'll go to you. Give you a second to think about it, Chad.
I think for me, an innovator is somebody who might put unexpected things together to make something new. For me, innovation is kind of like about compounding ideas and bringing different forces maybe that wouldn't make sense together, but magic happens when they do. When they collide, there's something that happens.
It's about the collision of multiple things that sometimes are disparate, right? Chad, how do you define an innovator?
I guess to me, being an innovator is somebody that's more inspired by the problem than the solutions that they see. So it could be any number of reasons that somebody ends up innovating. The difference between somebody that innovates and an innovator, I don't know, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that today, but I think for me, being an innovator is just not willing to settle for the options that are out there to answer the problem that you're obsessed with.
And it's interesting, oftentimes when I ask this question, I like to follow it up by asking, are you an innovator? Because that is the question that we're often not asking ourselves, because innovators are often those people that are a little bit separate. They're the ones that have, started a tech company or maybe are on like a large Forbes 100 list, although you've been on some important lists recently. But would you say that you are an innovator? And if so, how do you know?
I think the way people define us isn't always the way that we define ourselves. Innovator is certainly a label that I've had or have. I guess for me, with respect to Guitars Over Guns, seeing that there was an issue of access and opportunity and knowing my personal story and how music impacted my life, knowing that I would be lost without it, to see that it was missing as an option was just not acceptable. And so it didn't feel like as much of a choice, like I'm gonna decide to be an innovator, but it was a can't not do situation. It's just like, I have within my control the ability to organize people to address this issue. We can't not try.
Yeah.
I mean, it's right there. And then that obviously led to a kind of continual evolution of just continuing to ask questions about how well we're doing it or what else needs to be done or why things are like that in the first place. And when you start pulling at those threads, then you kind of get pulled into innovating, I guess. But it's hard to stop. I mean, if you keep asking the right questions and there aren't answers, it's hard to walk away.
I think what's interesting about what you said is part of your identity as an innovator is not only just seeing a problem that you have the skills, the relationships, the talent, because it's in the music space, to try to solve or develop a solution to, but also that process of questioning and constantly asking. I think some of the times that I've been pushed to be more innovative and try new things, it's because you asked me a question, which is like, why are you not doing this? Why are you not doing that? And I think what's interesting about this concept of an innovator's identity is, to what degree are we asking questions of ourselves that get us to be more innovative, to think differently, and to identify and get clarity around the problems that are real problems that we can solve. What about you, Marte? Are you an innovator? And if not, like how?
Really hard to self-identify with that term for me. I feel like the work that I do, particularly the strategy work, working with organizations going in, I feel like I'm more of like a facilitator of that kind of thinking and of those insights, and then helping people with the frameworks to follow through on bringing ideas together. Basically, I start in my approach by getting people a little uncomfortable. That's the whole concept of an icebreaker, is you kind of, everybody's uncomfortable and there's shared empathy, shared experience in that. So I think we can't really innovate until we're in a space where there's trust and where there's compassion. So that's where innovation, I feel like, can take root and get sparked, because then there is an open forum for sharing ideas. And for me, it's not my ideas that are necessarily innovative, but sometimes it's being a connection or being in the right place at the right time to say something that, you know, sparks somebody else's imagination. So I would say more that I identify with being a facilitator of innovation rather than that way myself. Although I love creativity and it's something that inspires me. And what you're talking about, which is we have to ask ourselves questions. I have a practice where I really like work on being a better person and asking myself questions like that. Am I meeting the mark? Where could I be doing better? What am I not doing that I could be, in terms of being of service and being a channel for other people to make those connections? But really working on virtues is something that, for me to be innovative, you have to be self-aware and you have to know where you need to get better and improve. And you can do that with practice. I think that's a skill, but growth mindset is part of that for me.
And you said a lot that I think makes me want to go back to the beginning, which is, you say you don't identify as an innovator, which I disagree. I don't know about you, Chad, but like, I think she's probably one of the most innovative people that I know. But we'll let you have that. But I know that at the heart of what you do and what you love, and I would venture to say maybe one of your superpowers, is harnessing creativity, right? Where did that all begin for you? Take us back. Where did it start?
Oh, my messy childhood. And by that, I mean, like, I was involved in all the arts. I was writing plays for my puppets. I was making sets and costumes. I was performing everywhere I went, doing magic shows. I had instruments. I had art sets. I was making clothes for my bears. Like, I was fully immersed. My parents really saw that I had a creative impulse. And my mom is an early childhood educator. So for her, she's just like, first of all, she has a lot of energy. She wants to sing and make up songs and create things all day long. Let me give her some platforms for that. So from the very beginning, I felt like, you know, I was in the dirt making sandcastles and creating worlds in my imagination. And I was always encouraged to do that. Also, reading was a really big part of my childhood, and playing the piano and really learning how to get good at something by work and hard work and self-reflection. But mainly it was the joy of creating. I was always having my hands in something, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And my preschool was a lab preschool at a university. So we had two-way glass, and we kind of knew what was happening, but we did wild experiments and they were encouraged. And so I feel like that really got me into a space of practicing that. Now, being a professional musician, I kind of forgot about that for a little while, and I did the rigor and I did the process, and I created a pathway toward excellence every day that takes a lot. But I really am so happy that I'm now able to draw on both of those sides, and pairing that with the strategic planning and how much I love solving problems in a logical way, but being able to do both. But definitely started in the sandbox of all of the arts when I was little.
And it's interesting when we think about where our creativity, innovation, all of these things begin, a lot of times in adulthood, if you haven't had the benefit of that through line, like I think music for you is perhaps your through line, music for you as well as your through line, but some of us lose it, right? Some of us kind of get into a space where you either have an experience where you're not able to tap into that. And I think that identity of reclaiming your innovator self is different. I know for me, I was a musician, so to speak, and then I stopped completely. And I think part of that process of like reconnecting with being innovative was in part reconnecting with creativity. But Chad, you said something interesting, which was music kind of saved you and it opened up a lot of doors. Talk to us about where that all started.
One of the things that you said that made me kind of piece this together is like, you know, the best innovators or creatives or whatever are people that kind of refuse to grow up and like protect that childhood imagination. And music, for whatever limitations it provides, it's so freeing and that it like protects the walls from being built on that creativity. And I think for that reason, it's such a wonderful escape for people on the creative side. And obviously music is a great escape for people in all aspects. So whether it's the song you turn on when you break up with a, you know, girl in middle school, or it's a, you know, classical piece that like takes you to another place and like harkens those emotions. As somebody that's creating music, like it's like holding your breath. It's like the only thing you can focus on when you're doing it. And so in that way, it takes you out of whatever else is going on around you. And it's something that you're able to lose yourself in. And so for me, you know, I felt like I was just kind of a different kid, a weird kid. Like, you know, certainly plenty of things that felt like maybe didn't fit in. And the pain of that as a kid and like wanting to fit in or being bullied or like, you know, all the things that make me who I am and unique and different are the things that you kind of run away from as a kid because that's your vulnerability. And like, hopefully as an adult, you learn to embrace that. And as far as superpowers go, I mean, that's like how we connect with people. And I think the most important thing to protect in relationships or in company culture or whatever. But for me, music was the thing that I could turn to that was free of judgment, free of limitation, free of anything other than like my ability to just be absorbed in a moment and lifted out of the reality of what was going on. So I think that's kind of been the through line for me throughout my career and my professional music career, my kind of personal musical development, my professional careers as a business leader. And it's also the thing that I think has brought people in and allowed me to connect with people in that intimate or vulnerable of a way that has allowed the right questions to be asked. And like that process of innovation, when you're asking questions at that level, you're really getting to things that don't have answers because they're questions that aren't asked.
Yeah. There's a couple things that I want to like push pin. One, this idea of the intimacy of relationships and what that opens up for you in terms of innovation. But I think more pressing is you mentioned that music is freeing. It's free from judgment. It's free from some of these other roadblocks. And then it makes me realize, and I don't know if you have ever had this train of thought, that to some degree, I think innovation is a privilege. I think that the process of being free enough to ask the questions, I know we've had the pleasure, and you've also had the pleasure through the Miami Fellows program, like getting space to retreat, getting space through boot camp to think and like take a step back. And I think about all the times that we've done strategy sessions, it's been a space that is unencumbered, right? Where we are in the professional position, we have kind of the space to be able to just say, what if we did this? Or how might we do X? Or how might we think differently? So I guess where I want to go to is to ask, what are some of the roadblocks or some of the barriers, both systemic or otherwise, that you think are inhibiting folks from being more innovative or from really seeing themselves as innovators? I think a lot about kids that we work with. I don't necessarily know if they have the privilege of seeing themselves as innovators because of all of the social, political kind of cultural barriers that sometimes stand in the way. So I'll go first to you, but then also back to you, Marte.
I guess by nature, in order to innovate, you have to see there being like a light at the end of the tunnel. And so if you don't have any perception of what you're working towards or what could be, or that something could be different, then it's probably a lot harder to innovate. And in that sense, I think there's a lot of systemic barriers, particularly for the youth that we work with. It comes down to like, what examples do you have of people that have that mindset that's different? That they're not stuck because they're refusing to allow themselves to be in. And I'm not like this, everyone just needs to pick themselves up by their bootstraps kind of mentality on any of this. Quite the contrary. I think it's a radical act of like self-love to tell yourself that you can have something different. It's also the scariest thing to do, because that is the vulnerability that like you've built up all this armor to protect yourself against. So if you're not sure that you're going to get 3 square meals a day and have a safe place to come home to and like a quiet place to do your homework, and there's trauma of any sort, either like inherently or immediately in front of you or generationally, or like you're carrying a lot of things that make it really hard to see that there could be something different. So there's a ton of barriers, and those are rooted in systemic inequalities that we've never seen proliferate our news feeds more than this moment. So without speaking to each of them individually, there's a lot, particularly for people of color, and particularly for youth that are living in poverty, and people that have been there for generations, where the opportunities of ownership and the opportunities of wealth creation and the opportunities of changing your environment, there's a lot of reasons to kind of give up that hope. But if we can put examples and opportunities for kids to see hope in other people, then it really comes down to like, all right, it's a mindset shift. It's a choice that you have to commit to making. And there's plenty of examples of people that have had every barrier in the world against them, but still have overcome it or been able to, commit to that mindset. I mean, think about Mandela and being in prison and saying like, the only thing that can't be taken from me is my mindset, is my ability to have hope. So, there's a lot of barriers, but it's possible.
I agree. And before we go to you, Marte, I just think, I don't believe that conversations around being an innovator or being innovative can be divorced from the reality of systemic barriers and the fact that mindset has so much to do with it. And part of what I talk about in the book is that you need to consider these different forms of capital and thinking about creating an innovative identity, because they're natural influences. And I think it behooves us to do that. Otherwise, you are not giving everybody an equal shot at the opportunity to really think about that pathway, because part of who you are is completely out of the equation.
There was a like team building activity, something that we did with another organization one time, and it was, I don't know, it doesn't really matter exactly what it was, but it was something like bouncing quarters into a cup, and they started out without any see if you can bounce a quarter into the cup, you have 60 seconds, and then it was like it was 3 people and you're all trying to do it one at a time, and then if you got it, it was like, wow, that was awesome, and that was the goal. And then they said, all right, do it again, and this time you need to get 5 shots in the cup. And everyone's like, oh man, it just took us the whole time to get that one. Like, we didn't even know it was possible. And then almost everyone in the room was able to do it. And then they're like, all right, now you have 30 seconds. And again, everyone was able to do it. And it was like, what stuck with me is, if you are forced to think that something is possible, or that like it can be achieved, or somebody's just challenging you to achieve more, like we need those moments of encouragement to know that things are possible, or the idea that something can be achieved all of a sudden makes you feel like, all right, well, now the onus is on me. If it's not being achieved, I can no longer blame the circumstances around me. Like, I have to take accountability. And so in the inability to divorce innovation from circumstance, like the mindset and like who and how the mindset is developed or challenged is a really important piece of that.
It's the grit factor. Marte, back to the original question, which was thinking about innovation in terms of potentially being a privilege, or what are those systemic influences, whether they're barriers, whether they're factors, they necessarily, in my opinion, influence who you are as an innovator. So curious about your personal experience with that. You're a woman, so that's one place to start. But also thinking about some of the work that you have done and how perhaps you may have seen that in some of your engagements.
I'm an innovator, but if I'm being honest with you, I couldn't always call myself an innovator. I've spent the better part of a decade launching and leading projects designed to help everyday people access their innovation potential. It's included projects that have unlocked over $75 million for things that bridge gaps in access, opportunity, and equity. When I transitioned from being a trial attorney to leading organizations in the innovation space, what I really needed was a guide to help me answer two critical questions. Am I an innovator? And what type of innovator am I? The problem is that our society and our own identity serve as barriers to keep our powerful potential as innovators locked away and hidden. Innovation Currency is the book that is designed to help you discover your hidden innovator. If you've ever wondered what innovation looks like for you, how you might use innovation in your day-to-day life, or how you can use innovation to help solve some of the most pressing challenges in the world, or even your workplace or community, then please grab your copy of Innovation Currency, because I can assure you that after reading it, you'll have the tools, the experience, and the translatable skills to unlock your hidden innovator. To find out where you can purchase your copy in whatever format makes sense for you, scroll down to the show notes for the appropriate links.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really unpacking what you two have said. I always think that what makes a person free is the ability to make a choice. Mm-hmm. And often when I'm working with clients, when I'm working with organizations or leaders or individuals, the question is, where do you have choice? And, I don't think that we can ever step out of the inherent bias and like the framework that we see the world through, mm-hmm. because it is so absorbed in us. We can't necessarily even see it's there until we run up against places where we see we are not free, or if we see that other people are not free. So the question is then, how do you make a framework to work forward, to move forward, and being aware of what you can, proactively opening doors for people, thinking about if only the models we have of innovation look a certain way, mm-hmm. and we're not satisfied with that, coming together and saying like, wait, we have a choice to show a different way. And I think what you were saying about models is so powerful, especially when it comes to people who don't self-identify as innovators or as creative people. I don't use the word creative when I'm asking people to create with me, because it is a barrier. That word in and of itself is a barrier. If I say play or I say, joy, all of a sudden people can go there. But I think when we're talking about innovation, it has to be inclusive or it's not going to work. But to be inclusive means the onus is on people who do have privilege to be working overtly, constantly, and proactively to open up spaces for that, to enable people who might not self-identify as innovators, mm-hmm. to be modeling for them and creating experiences for them to do that. So in my work, that looks like inclusive things, and that also looks like working with folks like you, Chad, and the work that you're doing. Also looking at ecosystems, being able to help a group of small nonprofits that don't have access to whatever practice it is that's going to help them raise more money, to tell their story in a more impactful way. It's all of these little things. And I do believe that just a small intentional impact that is ongoing over time does make a difference. And so for me, my practice is very personal. And because I'm a small business owner, I think about, what are the choices my business can make, and that I, through my business and who I hire, who I contract with, the projects I'm doing, who I invite into my space, the modeling that I do of what inclusive impact or innovation looks like, really does add up, because people are looking to leaders and to innovators in the space to show them what it looks like. And if we're not reflecting on that personally and as leaders, we're not going to have that kind of network impact. I really do think innovation happens not in a vacuum, but in en masse. I don't know, in like a bigger space in an ecosystem or beyond. But we have to be committed to it, and we have to be committed to leveraging whatever privilege and opportunities we have to blow it open and say, listen, you're welcome here, and model that with your choices and with the kinds of ways that you show your own leadership.
Who opened up doors for you? Think of outside of your family. Who opened up a door for you, and how did it change your trajectory?
Yeah, music opened up a door for me in a really major way, because like you, I was the weird kid. I was the outsider who plays the oboe anyway. Like, why would you do that? It's so weird. And it looks very uncomfortable when you see somebody playing it.
But I guess I'm asking, like, which person?
Which person?
Like a person.
Yeah, so it was probably one of my friends, a fellow, nerdy kid playing music. We wanted to do more things together and to get exposed to more people. So we would decide which orchestra, like youth orchestra stuff, we wanted to audition for. And then also my oboe teacher at Manhattan School of Music, he was in the New York Philharmonic. He came to the little university town where I grew up, and I got to listen to his master class. And then he allowed me to play for him for 10 minutes and I was 14, after all of the college kids had left. And he said, your instrument is not good. And also, you need a lot of work, kid. And I was like, oh my gosh, it kind of broke my heart. But a couple of months later, he said, listen, one of my students is selling an instrument. Would you like it? And, one thing led to another, and I ended up I thought I was going to go to Northwestern University and study French, be French and oboe professor. But he got me to turn my attention to New York City and going to a professional conservatory, which my dad is a liberal arts teacher. That was not ever something that I thought was appropriate, because learning is very important to me. And I know that academics aren't necessarily the thing that you go to a conservatory to study, but it really started there, and that changed my life. That really changed my life.
So Chad, which non-family member opened up doors of opportunity for you that you were able to cultivate a relationship with?
Yeah, I mean, I had two that immediately come to mind. The first was my mentor in Chicago, who was a professional trumpet player, and he worked at the kind of woodwind, brasswind shop down the street. And so it's where I went to it's where I bought my first trombone, and he was very cool about one came in that would be good for you because I know you're a jazz guy. And then my parents had I guess they hired a band that he had to play a party for my dad. I think it was my dad's 40th birthday, and I was probably 12 or 13, probably 13 or 14. And I sat in with the band, and he was just like, okay, we need to take a different approach. You've clearly got a passion for this. And so he started taking me down town with him and to jam sessions and to rehearsal bands that, there were these old guys in their 60s and 70s and some in their 80s that just loved getting together to play and had all this old big band music from the 40s. And so we had all these classic, big band era charts. But more importantly than the music, he also taught me how to be a musician, how to show up and be a guy that people want to be around, etiquette. When you go to a jam session, you don't run up all thirsty with your instrument next to the stage and that's not cool. Come, respect the situation, check people out, and then when offered an opportunity, step up, take it, don't overplay, appreciate it, and go back. And like, you will continue to build a relationship and a rapport with people. And just this whole thing was like, listen first, you know? And I think that's the best advice. That and the other piece of advice he gave me when putting, because you know, a few years went by, I knew all these musicians. I was getting called probably by like friends of my parents to like put together a band for this thing. It was like big, like, but I had to put together these bands. I had to like learn how to do that stuff. And his advice was always be the worst musician in your band. And to this day, it's how I build my team, you know, for Guitars Over Guns. It's how I build my bands. It's like pick people that you will play to the level to. If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, you know, or you're just an asshole and you think that you're, you know, more than you are. But like, if that's not the case, like, put yourself in a position to be challenged and to grow, because you will. And without that discomfort, there will be no growth. And then the other person was my high school band director, jazz band director, Jim Warwick. And he like immediately saw the potential that I had musically. And then I guess you could call it potential, not what he called it at the time, but the gap in like my leadership skills and abilities, and the self-awareness that I needed to gain to really become a leader. Because he's like, look, musically, you know, you could play in the top band, but I'm going to hold you back from that because that's not the leadership that you're showing right now. And it broke my heart. I mean, that was like, to be in that high school at New Trier at the, you know, like top jazz band, like that was a big deal. It's a band that's won awards all over the country. And like to be a young student in that band was like, you know, a really big deal. And he's like, I'm not going to do it. You musically, you deserve it, but you're not ready.
Yeah.
And that was like forced me to have a tremendous amount of self-reflection and just start working on myself as a person and as a leader, and kind of get out of my own head and like take the blinders off and look around me. And that's kind of what I attribute my pathway to leadership to.
And it's interesting, in the book, I talk a lot about how your social capital, or the relationships that you have, when you have deep intimacy and shared values, it's not just that the relationships open doors of opportunity, because they necessarily do, but more importantly, the relationships allow you to learn about yourself. And in learning about yourself, you develop skills, you gain a level of self-awareness that is, I think, essential to later innovating. If it's early in life, I think what I always respect about you, Chad, is you have this deep level of self-awareness, this deep ability to be vulnerable. And I think that is part of the linchpin to how innovative you are, and how you're able to think very differently about how best to serve the students, how best to serve the community. And we often don't realize where those things start. Sometimes they start in something as simple as, your attitude doesn't match your altitude, so I'm going to keep you here so that you can grow. What about you, Marte? What is something that your relationships, your social connections have taught you about yourself?
Well, they first of all taught me I'm not for everybody. Okay. Like, I literally had somebody tell me they were over my energy, and so that they would not be working with me again. And that's like part of the risk when you're bold and you do work that sometimes like engages parts of people that they're not used to using. Sometimes that's a non-starter or a non-continuer, I guess. But I think it's really also taught me that I learn about myself from other people in a way that's so much more valuable than what's happening in here all day, every day. And it's really when I'm able to work with somebody in a deep level, and we're doing something that is super fun or super uncomfortable or both, where there's just this magic of learning. It's like in flow, they talk about, you know, optimal challenge with optimal preparation. And I feel like a lot of times in collaborations, not only do I learn from whoever it is I'm working with, but also I learn about me in relation to them, either because of what they're saying or because of the energy that's flowing and what's happening. And being able to, you know, intuitively sense being in a space, you know, I do a lot of designing events and things like that. I design for the way people are going to feel, but I don't always have an understanding of the impact that makes. I've had people at Venture Cafe come up to me later saying, you told me this one thing that, you know, really changed my outlook on how I saw myself. And I also trust that when you're in relationship to yourself in a healthy way, which is not, I'm the greatest, but, you know, I have something to learn always, and I'm going to make mistakes always. But to be seeking out people who will give you feedback, even if it's painful, because sometimes that's the best stuff. Case in point. But really, there's a magic that happens when you allow yourself to be contributed to, and to see yourself as a channel for, you know, elevating something that couldn't happen if it was just you in a room by yourself. I really think there is magic in community, and part of it is energetic, but part of it is also sometimes you don't know who's, you know, you stop yourself from going to a place because it doesn't make sense, but then you allow yourself to follow that impulse, and you're at the right place at the right time to hear the thing you need to hear, or sometimes you are that for somebody else. So I think being generous is so important, in addition to being humble and saying, like, listen, I have a lot of work yet to do.
as we talked about.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's so interesting because, you know, I think one of the things that music is such a great example of, or illustrates so well, is creativity and creation is kind of a function, or at its best, with limitation. So like, we create the best when there are limitations. And this is true of anyone that's ever given you a blank sheet of paper and said, create. Like, it's paralyzing. But if somebody's like, come up with a solution, and you have these limitations, back to like the quarters in a cup idea, but like, whatever it is, you know, you have these things, whether it's there's not enough funding, and so you need to create a volunteer thing, or there's not enough resources or people or opportunities out there, like that's what forces you to innovate. And I think the same is true as individuals. And unless we're honest with ourselves and we know what our limitations are, we never really access that creativity inside of us, and we never really understand, you know, it's like when you see those charts of people's, you know, personalities or brains or whatever, like they skew in one direction. It's almost like the limitations kind of push it that way.
Yep.
So it's just an interesting parallel.
And it brings me to our quick lightning round, so to speak, which is, it's interesting you say that. I like to think about one of the roots of your innovation identity is being your superpower. And I think when you get clarity on your superpower, and I like to say people have at least 3 superpowers, zone of genius, whatever you want to call it, that leaning into your superpower, and we've done a lot of work on this, helps you be more innovative, because you know where you can really be optimal, where you can be in flow. And you got no business trying to innovate in a domain that's not naturally like your God-given talent and gift. So I guess my question for both of you is, you know, what are your top 3 superpowers? We'll start with you, Marte, and then I'll go to you, Chad, because you can think about it.
Top 3?
Yeah.
Gosh.
I mean, I know you got 3. I can name the top 3, but what are they?
Well, I'd say fearlessness. I'm not afraid to try things that I don't know where they're going. I don't know if they're going to work. And that's what you are as a performer. Like, you prepare, you do hours and hours and hours of prep on your own. You walk into uncertainty every time. You never really know. I've had pages fall over. I've inhaled my hair. I've, had the pages blow away. I've gotten them in the wrong order. We've had to stop because of Marte. Like, I'm prepared for anything, and I'm not afraid to. I'm an experiential learner, and I do believe if I don't know how to do it, if I do it, then I will have a little bit more experience at least. So fearlessness. I'd also say play. I love play. Yeah. And this is like going back to what we were saying earlier. Adults kind of forget that they can, or they think it's not appropriate, or they're afraid to be judged if they really get into it, which is part of the joy of what I get to do, because we go back to that space together. So fearlessness, play, and then the third one I think would be creativity, which is part intuitive and part just like following a process to get me over to a part of my brain where there's possibility. And that's probably the juiciest, most fun part of who I am and the work that I do.
Chad, what are your 3?
I was engrossed in what Marte said. But I don't know if you call it self-awareness or vulnerability or whatever. There's something in the ability to connect with people on a deeper level that I think is, you could call it listening, you can call it vulnerability, you can call it self-awareness. I think those are the things that like, that really create connection. And so I think that's one of them, and I don't necessarily know what to call it, but
Connection
is one. Being bold and believing that like things, part of it is a competitiveness, but being bold and not willing to lose if it's something that you care about, like really just like, we're gonna get there.
Tenacity.
Grit.
Yeah, so I think that's something that's kind of defined where we've come. I think creativity is a really good one. I think like the ability to piece things together, like I'm always questioning. Like I never trust that the solution is what it is, or I want to like research and dig down and like see why. And that forces me to be pretty creative with the solutions that we come up with, or I guess innovative. I mean, when I think about the strengths, and it's kind of easiest to think about these when I think about like my weaknesses, because one of my strengths is not planning and like being really strategic and thoughtful. Like I think on a really big level.
But you're curious. I think like you've got healthy curiosity. Yeah.
Definitely like what drives the creativity.
I guess to close this out, my last question is, why does the world need innovators? I'll start with you, Marte, and we'll end with you. Why does the world need innovators?
Because there's endless solutions that we're not going to get to unless we have those collisions. And we need all the solutions we can get. We have a lot of gnarly problems. A lot of them are built into the structure and, bias, and just we could unpack that for a long time. But we need innovators because we constantly need, the world is changing. We are changing. Look at how much innovation has happened in response to the pandemic. All of a sudden, we're used to another way. We are now having Zoom dinners with our families distantly. Like, I didn't realize that I could have a Zoom dinner with my family. Now it's something we do every week. So we need innovators to help us be close as we get in. I think the world gets even more technologically advanced. And we need innovators because they make our lives better. What they create when we give them space, opportunity, and resources and networks, they make us better. And there's a lot of stuff out there that people create that we don't even know we need, that can help us socially, intellectually, physically, etc. Like in all of those ways, innovators. I mean, look, we're surrounded by lights. Light bulb was a thing. That was an innovation. And now we just don't even think about it. Mm-hmm. We're carrying powerful technology around with us in our pockets. Supercomputers that used to take up huge buildings. So we need it because as we grow as human beings, I hope it's also a place for us to develop greater empathy and solutions that really make things better for everybody.
Chad, why do we need innovators?
I think we need innovators because without discomfort, there's no growth, and like innovation challenges the system that's in place. And so with the rate that things evolve and the brilliance of people in the world that continue to come up with new things that make us uncomfortable, that challenge us, technology is the easiest and greatest example of it, but that forces things to change, and then people need to catch up. And when we think about the big systemic structures and how kind of bureaucratic and slow moving they can be, they can't adapt. And so people need to be innovative to figure out how to manage where we're going and where we are. There's really is there a world without innovation? I mean, like, innovation kind of is forced upon us. It's not necessarily something we choose. Some people do, in some ways we do, but
some people don't. Thank you. I think, the way I define innovation is in terms of addressing issues that impact the human condition. And with billions and billions of people on Earth, of course, to your point, we can't help but have innovators. But I think now more than ever, we need more innovators that are representative of who makes up the human race and not just a select few. So thank you guys. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Marte, for joining us in this conversation.